Welcome to the International News Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Join our growing international community. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has almost been 1 month long now. And we've decided to give you a general update of what is happening in the conflict and how it can potentially be resolved. Now, as everyone recalls, and as we have been extensively reporting on February 24th, Russia decided to invade Ukraine. At the beginning of Russia's invasion, it was assumed that Ukraine, particularly Kyiv, and Ukraine's government under President Volodymyr Zelensky would fall within 72 hours. That notably has not happened. Ukraine has held out for almost a month now, and Russian soldiers seem to be completely gridlocked. Ground forces are stuck where they have been after the initial momentum gained by Russian forces in the invasion of Ukraine. The largest fighting is occurring in the capital city of Kyiv and the major strategic port city of Mariupol. As far as Kyiv is concerned, a major Russian column and the large portion of Russian forces and soldiers inside Ukraine is held and being stopped miles outside of the city. A strategic goal which Russia intended to capture immediately during the conflict. Now, Mariupol has been experiencing massive bombing for the last 20 days, completely leveling the entire city. Some estimates say that 90% of buildings have been completely destroyed. And Russian bombings, not just in Mariupol, but across all of Ukraine, have been becoming more and more indiscriminate. Not just attacking military targets, but hitting schools, hospitals, and other residential buildings as well. Mariupol is still holding out despite the massive and brutal Russian aerial onslaught. The city of Mariupol has been hit by not only artillery strikes, airstrikes by planes, but also 7 major Russian warships which are parked in the Sea of Azov bombarding the city. Nonetheless, the city has managed to hold out. Russian soldiers have attempted to move in, but fighting with Ukrainian resistance soldiers continues block to block to block. And not only is Russia stalled, it seems that Ukrainian defense forces are actually making gains from some initial losses. Today, a major suburb, the suburb of Kyiv, outside of Kyiv, was captured by Ukrainian forces. Now, this is important because Kyiv gives Ukrainian forces the ability to control the major northwestern highway entering the city, further blocking off any potential entry points for the Russian military. And the biggest embarrassment for Russia is the fact that it has not been able to assert air dominance in this conflict. Typically, when a larger, greater power invades a smaller or medium-sized country with a much less advanced military, air power is established within the first week. This has not happened. Dogfights are still occurring in the skies of Ukraine. Russian airplanes are being shot down by anti-aircraft missiles and defense systems of the Ukrainian forces. This conflict is entering a standstill, and essentially what can be viewed as a war of attrition. And that is not good for the civilians of Ukraine. While politically and militarily, this is a positive development for the government of Ukraine and generally for the political independence of the country, its civilians are suffering because of this. Ukraine's defenses have caused this war to enter a completely new shift, shifting not just to a war of attrition, but one of Russian desperation. As Russian soldiers continue to be stalled and their losses continue to mass up, Russia and its military command, particularly that under President Vladimir Putin, will become more desperate, resorting to desperate tactics. In the worst case scenario, we can see Russian soldiers or the military under the command of Vladimir Putin utilizing biological or chemical weapons. Now, there is no evidence to prove that this is a plan, and it probably isn't. But if push comes to shove, and the Russian government has a choice of losing a conflict to a much smaller country, which everyone thought it would envelop within 72 hours, it will use those weapons. Which makes peace, and a peace deal, incredibly important to hatch out. In addition to being stalled, the Russian military has lost conservative estimates. Now understand that the estimates and the general view of how many soldiers Russia has lost is something that is up for debate. For a good reason. People that support Russia want to show that it's lost very few soldiers and that the invasion is going well. Spoiler alert, it's not, and Russia has lost a lot of soldiers. Even the most conservative estimates paint the number at being in the low thousands. The most reasonable estimate would be around 10,000 soldiers, which is much, much more than the United States lost in its invasions of both Afghanistan and Iraq put together. This is a very bloody military conflict. The fighting has been incredibly fierce. Many people have lost their lives. Not just the estimated 10,000 Russian soldiers, but countless of thousands of Ukrainian civilians. It's estimated that in Mariupol alone, 2,300 people have lost their lives. And not just have Ukrainians lost their lives, but many others, countless of others, have lost their livelihoods. 10 million people have been displaced in Ukraine, the vast majority being internally displaced. They have lost their homes, either because they've been completely destroyed or simply because they've had to flee for safety. Of these 10 million internally displaced people, or generally displaced people, over 3.5 million have become external refugees going to other countries. As we covered yesterday, the vast majority of these, over 2 million, have gone to Poland, the rest to other European countries in the West, such as Moldova or Hungary. A minority and very small number have fled to Belarus and Russia, the country attacking Ukraine itself. It's very clear that peace is a key interest and common interest of both sides, both Russia and Ukraine. Russia politically, because this is just a massive loss and has been incredibly embarrassing on the international level. Not only has this been embarrassing by watching the Russian military lose to a much smaller, much less well-armed military force, but it has also completely isolated Russia. The war has majorly been viewed as unprovoked, shameful, and a large power bullying a much smaller country, costing massive human lives. Russia's indiscriminate bombings, which have blown up schools, hospitals, and targeted shelters where people have been, normal civilians, have been hiding from Russian bombings, have only made the situation worse, isolating Russia and making it one of the most sanctioned countries in world history. In terms of Ukraine's interest, the cost on civilians is very high. So it is obviously in the interest of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin to come to some kind of agreement, create a ceasefire, and create lasting peace so this does not happen again. Understand that this is one of the most shameful and darkest episodes of Western history, at the very least European history. The siege of Mariupol, we don't have enough information now, but is probably, once this war is over and the exact numbers are tallied, going to come down as one of the deadliest military actions on civilians and innocent people in European, if not world history, at the very least in the contemporary era. A peace deal needs to be made. There has been progress. Now, peace negotiations from the Russian and Ukrainian side have been continuing, and they've been very intensive over the past 2 weeks, but it seems that they may be in a standstill. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated that he is willing to completely drop Ukraine's bid to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, if Russia is willing to declare a ceasefire and withdraw all of its troops from Ukraine, effectively ending the invasion. Now, this is an important concession from Ukraine because this was the casus belli, or the reason for war, or at the very least, the public justification by Vladimir Putin for entering Ukraine and declaring this a peacekeeping operation. Essentially, Vladimir Putin and Russia viewed NATO, or Ukraine eventually joining NATO, as a potential threat to its national security and foreign policy interests. The reality is that is a threat, but also NATO never had any intention of allowing Ukraine to join. NATO does not allow countries with unsettled territorial disputes inside the organization. Ukraine has 2 or 3 major territorial disputes, depending on how you divide Donbass. But at the very least, Ukraine cannot agree on its territory with Crimea and Donbass between itself and Russia. It would have never been allowed into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and President Volodymyr Zelensky recognizes this and is willing to drop his bid. Now, considering that this was the justification for war, Russia under Vladimir Putin should accept these terms and declare peace. declaring a ceasefire and withdrawing its troops. But it seems that Vladimir Putin is hesitant and does not want to accept this peace deal, fearing a shameful loss in a war against a much smaller country. So it seems that this war is going to continue unless President Vladimir Putin is willing to swallow his pride. Understand that it's not just Moscow's government or political system that's making these decisions. All political decisions in Russia come from Vladimir Putin. Russia used to be, but is not, a democracy. Vladimir Putin has complete autocratic control, not just of domestic policy, but especially foreign policy. And the only person that's going to determine peace in this conflict is going to be the man that started this war in the first place, Putin himself. As this war continues, its effects are not just directly hurting Ukraine. This has hurt the entire world. This conflict has not only shattered the post-Cold War security arrangements that previously existed and have increased tensions between Russia and the West to levels not seen since the Cold War. And in fact, this is worse than the Cold War. Tensions between the West and Russia, or at the time the Soviet Union, were high during the Cold War, but this is even higher, and the tensions are much, much greater and much, much graver. Now, not only has this caused political issues on the global scale, economically, it has hurt supply chains, causing a grain and wheat shortage on global markets, and also, obviously, affecting gas and oil prices, which fuel our entire economy. Even if you drive an electric car, everything you eat, consume, use, the computer you're watching or phone you're watching this on, is transported by some form of truck, airplane, or boat, which is powered by, typically, fuel. This has caused global prices to increase. The crisis is affecting everyone. And finally, what is the most concerning about this entire war is the threat of nuclear disaster, either through the intentional use of nuclear weapons by Russia, which can happen. Understand that Russia's leadership under Vladimir Putin has been extremely unpredictable. Many people did not see this war happening. I myself had believed that Russia's grandstanding during the Russo-Ukrainian crisis before the invasion was simply brinkmanship. The U.S. government and the State Department and the U.S. intelligence services and military were saying, yeah, Russia is going to invade. But most other media entities, nations, and people that work or global political actors in the international arena felt that this was not going to happen. This was generally a surprise, and so would the use of nuclear weapons be. But hey, anything can happen now. And not only is the threat of potential use or utilization of Russia's nuclear arms by Vladimir Putin a threat, nuclear accident is something that is very possible. Understand that Ukraine is a country that has quite a few nuclear power plants. And while I want to disclose and completely state as a disclaimer that nuclear energy statistically is the safest, most renewable, and efficient form of energy that we as humans have today, this is not a criticism of nuclear energy. But when there's a war and military action against these plants, danger occurs. Notably, and the most concerning thing that has happened has been the Russian possession of Chernobyl, which was the place and the source of the world's largest nuclear accident in 1986, the Chernobyl disaster. Now, recently, a wildfire broke out around the Chernobyl power plant, which is extremely concerning. The wildfire resulted from fighting and shots being exchanged between Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. Now, the fire was quickly extinguished and no radiation levels increased around the area, but they could have. And if incidences like this keep happening, and Chernobyl is not the only nuclear power plant to experience some kind of fire-related incident, the nuclear plant, which is active, Chernobyl is deactivated, but the one that's active and still working in Zaporizhzhia had a fire break out inside the premises of the plant. As this war continues, disaster can occur, which is just another reason for peace to be established. Hopefully these peace talks come out positively and cool heads prevail, and we can finally put this conflict behind us. Keep in mind, this is the only thing I've pretty much been talking about for the past month, and essentially it is something that is important to talk about. This is historically the most important development in contemporary history since 9/11, and we are going to continue to follow this. But hopefully, we'll have good reason to stop soon with some kind of peace agreement being hatched out between the Russian and Ukrainian sides. Maybe I'm being too positive and too optimistic. People tell me that I am too much of an optimist. If you agree with those people and disagree with me, let me know what you think in the comments, and let's have a nice, open, productive discussion about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war that is occurring as a result of it. Pretty much let me know anything that you think in the comments about this conflict in general. We have covered it extensively. Please go over our videos that you can find in our Europe playlist, and we will continue to cover it as major developments are being made. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.